We just saw the FDA approve the drug Daratumumab for elderly patients. We've talked about how lenalidomide dexamethasone or RVD light is pretty much how we treat those patients today. Familiarity with the study for the audience. Tom, do you want to just
Sure.
quickly describe the results of the ALCYONE trial?
Yeah, the ALCYONE trial involved 700 patients, and they were randomly assigned to 2 regimens. It was really a European-based regimen. Their standard induction of bortezomib, melphalan, and prednisone, so VMP. And so it was VMP plus or minus daratumumab. They got 9 cycles of VMP with daratumumab. It was weekly for 6 weeks, and then it was every 3 weeks for 9 cycles. And then after that, the arm that got Dara VMP continued on Dara maintenance. The arm that got VMP just stopped therapy after 9 months. And it showed, this is the first study really that showed a quadruplet is really better than a triplet. It was a nice study. The problem in the US is we don't really use VMP, so I don't know how translatable it is to us. But that said, there was a marked advantage to VMP versus, advantage of Dara VMP versus VMP, where the overall response rate was over 90% versus low 70%. And PFS, at 18 months was 74% versus 50%. Very different in terms of the 4-drug arm. Now, what I really liked about this study is there was, if you look at the PFS curve, there was initial separation of the curve in the first 9 cycles. But then when they got to after 9 cycles to maintenance, the curve actually even separated out more. And daratumumab used as a single agent as a maintenance looked extremely well tolerated. That's what I really like, especially in the older population. Some of the other drugs that we use for maintenance, bortezomib, lenalidomide, et cetera, there are toxicities, especially cumulative toxicities in the older patient. I don't think you have the same cumulative toxicities.
Let's come back to the maintenance later. In the FDA approval, I understand that obtaining MRD negativity was one of the things highlighted. Does that influence your choice of therapy, Sagar?
I think MRD negativity, certainly in the context of induction therapy, is a feather in the cap of the regimen. But for now, I still think of it as a prognostic tool. It tells you who's going to do well. It doesn't necessarily tell you that what you've done has influenced who's going to do well. So I think it's certainly nice to see. We've not seen that in the older patient population like we did in the ALCYONE trial, but that alone is not sufficient for me to make a decision.
Amrita, what are the practical implications of this for you? I mean, we don't use melphalan here in the US. How do you think this is going to impact your clinical practice in the transplant ineligible patients?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, because I don't think any of us have written a VMP prescription. I think for me, it allows me to feel comfortable using a quadruple regimen, even in an elderly, frail population. And maybe will that be RVD light plus Dara? Probably, I think. I think the other thing that was nice is that, yeah, in an elderly, frail population, you can attain, if you look at MRD in terms of prognostic, you can get MRD negative with a quadruple regimen. So hopefully you can have outcomes similar to your transplant eligible population downstream.
Ajai, are we going to use daratumumab in the US now with other combinations, do you think, or is it not ready for that yet?
Well, I think the easiest extrapolation now is even if we're not so fond of using melphalan in newly diagnosed patients, you could do Dara VMP and just not give the M. And that Dara VD essentially is what that would be. And if people are using that in the relapse setting, you could easily do that in the frontline setting. In terms of going off-label, we know US oncologists do that. VRD, we didn't have the SWOG 7-7 study comparing VRD to RD for many years, and yet people were using VRD based on a phase 2 regimen. So I think in US, physicians are going to be comfortable extrapolating from the Dara VMP to get frontline Dara, but then substituting in the drugs that they really like to use that as a backbone. And I think the other point is that, to Tom's point, we shouldn't lump all quadruplets in the same category. So RVD plus cyclophosphamide added neutropenia without benefit, but VMP with Dara doesn't significantly add to toxicity other than a slightly higher rate of infection. But I think that's probably the patient population.
I think for sure we have to understand toxicity before we leap wholeheartedly into 4-drug cocktails.
Yeah.
It does feel right for oncologists in that we assume that there'll be an R-CHOP for multiple myeloma, and it's starting to look like a monoclonal antibody plus the backbone might be.
We're waiting for the results of the Maya study, which is a combination of lenalidomide, dexamethasone, and daratumumab versus lenalidomide, dexamethasone. We're kind of expecting that later this year. What do you need to see from RD-Dara to use it instead of RVD light, for example, Amrita?
Well, I mean,
What are you waiting for that's going to be, yep, that's it, I'm going to do that?
well, I think, again, if I could see MRD negative, I'd be happy. If I can see similar PFS, which is pretty good with RVD light. So, I mean, I think if I could get both of those, it's about 80% at 2 years, I think I'd be very happy. And I'd be surprised, quite frankly, if they don't meet that.
Any other thoughts on that, Sagar?
I mean, I think if you look at Pollux, the median PFS for Pollux for the Len-Dara-Dex arm is probably somewhere between 40 and 48 months. So if the upfront trial gives you something in that same ballpark, you're looking at sort of the same benefit for a transplant-ineligible patient that we saw from the IFM transplant arm, right?
Right.
48 months was the median PFS. So, I mean, that's pretty powerful.
And the SWOG 777 study, too, had a PFS of 43 months.
And that was, for those people that don't know what that is, just tell us.
So those are transplant-ineligible patients, or actually it was transplant-eligible and ineligible, but those patients mostly did not undergo transplantation.
And it was RVD versus...
RVD versus RD, and the PFS was 43 months in the RVD arm. So if we surpass that, I think, probably if I was to guess in terms of safety, because you asked about safety too, that I think the tolerability and the safety with DRD is going to be at least equivalent, if not better, than RVD. There'll be little or no neuropathy, which will be great.
So would equivalence be enough? I mean, it would be enough for me.
I think it would, actually. Yeah.
Equivalence between
Between
two arms.
RVD, yeah.
With a
versus-
safer triplet, less toxicity.
Will bortezomib go away as a frontline drug if you get combinations with no neuropathy that are just as good?
Well, I think this is where the studies are not identical, right? So it was without an intent to transplant. So the number of patients that were over 65 is relatively small, and they were giving twice weekly bortezomib intravenously. So it's not a really fair comparison. So, but I think we all agree that DRD is going to be very easy to give, even in an elderly population.